Welcome homebrewers to the Malt Miller YouTube channel. Today, in part 4 of our Thornbridge collaboration, we're going to homebrew a version of Jaipur.
Over the past few weeks, we've explored the story of Jaipur, from inside the brewery with head brewer Rob, to breaking down the recipe pint in hand, and even diving into the heritage of the Burton Union system. Now it's time to bring everything we've learnt together. We're back at Malt Miller HQ, and we're taking on the challenge of brewing Jaipur ourselves. Let's see just how close we can get to this modern classic.
Martin, have you come down yet from our trip up to Bakewell and spending all of that awesome time with the folks at Thornbridge?
James, my head has been spinning since then. You know, we've just watched back part 1 and 2, which you should definitely watch if you haven't seen those parts already, especially if you're going to have a go at homebrewing this beer.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of content in there and a lot of stuff I had to kind of pick through, kind of get the nitty-gritty of how we're going to transform that commercial beer into a homebrew version.
Yeah, because it really isn't as straightforward as just getting a recipe sheet, scaling that down and brewing it. There's lots of processes and ingredients that are used by Thornbridge that actually make a significant difference to the way that their beer presents in the glass.
Yeah, I've experienced that. You know, I brewed a batch before we went there just using their brew sheet. Nowhere near.
No.
You know, there were so many things that we picked up on while we were there, while we were around the brewery, spending that time with Rob, going through the recipe in details. You know, today we're going to brew, which I think is maybe version 4 or 5. I lost count, and I've drunk a fair amount of Jaipur that we've got in our fridge, as well as my versions, and compared it, and tried to pick through what little points I need to just tweak to get this as close as possible. Now, James, we're not just going to brew one batch today. I know you were stood behind the camera a lot and kind of like listening to the noise and trying to help direct us, but I want us to try and take on both versions of Jaipur, which is cask and then also the can bottle version.
Okay, so I'm guessing what we want to do then is brew 2 batches and have different yeast options in there. One to replicate their cask yeast strain, one to replicate their can bottle, the Cal Ale WLP001 Chico kind of yeast strain that they use.
And I think we should also explore some changes within the cellaring practice that they do. You know, they're going from completed fermentation into tank for different periods of time or into cask. So I think we should try to replicate that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm up for that, definitely. So give us a little overview then of the recipe we're going to be using today for your versions of Jaipur.
Right, I've got a lot of notes, so I'm going to have to refer to those because there was, like I say, a lot to take in. We kind of cover off what the ingredients are within the video with Rob. You know, it's low colour Maris Otter, so that's the grist, 100%. Okay. The tricky parts are when you start getting into bittering. So they use CO2 extract as well as some Magnum. Now, the only reason they don't use just CO2 extract, Rob explained, is because it comes in a 1.2 kilo tin, and it would mean opening a tin and a bit.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for them.
No.
But today we're going to stick with just 100% CO2 extract. Based on the alphas of the hops that then follow on from it, we're going to go for about 4.7 to 5 gram stroke millilitres of hop extract, which will deliver us like 45 IBU.
Right, okay, and the overall IBU we're going to be aiming for is in the 50s, yeah?
55 is what their target IBU, which is what Jaipur is.
And we'll pick the rest of that up through our whirlpool edition and our Hopnik edition, right?
Yeah, so yeah, we're going to break that into 2. We're going to start with the pellet, which they do, and it's like whirlpool for 5 minutes, then it stands for 15-20 minutes. Then we don't have a Hopnik vessel because we're going to brew on a Grainfather G40. We're then going to add the leaf hops in, and that's going to be a 20-minute period, and 50% of that we're going to use the whirlpool arm to again get everything wet, and then again let it settle down for 10 minutes. Sounds simple, but the real test is going to be actually doing it.
So we're both going to be brewing on Grainfather G40s, but this method can easily be replicated on lots of different brewing systems. We're using them because actually, unlike Thornbridge, who need to brew consecutive batches, you didn't fancy coming in at 6 o'clock this morning to get 2 batches done, did you?
We've got more than one brewing system, so we're going to use them at the same time.
Yeah, okay. But I think based on some of the projects we've done before, probably the St Austell project where we looked at tribute, I think there's stuff we can take from that that's going to really translate into how we follow the processes that Thornbridge follow as closely as possible.
I'd say of all the videos and breweries that we've kind of done, yes, St. Austell is the one that is probably closest in kind of what we're going to do today.
Yeah, because they've got a whirlpool and then they've got their hop aroma vessel, which does a similar job to Thornbridge's hop neck, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, I reckon, Martin, let's flip things around, get over to the brewing stations and actually crack on with our brew.
Yeah, let's go get doughed in.
We're over at the brew stations, Martin. I thank you first and foremost because you've prepped everything, right? You've prepped the water, you've got it heated up, you've programmed everything into the controllers we're using, and you've also weighed out all of our water additions.
This is a big brew day to me, James. I want this to go well.
So, talk us through a little bit of what we're doing with our water for this recipe.
Okay, so I started running the RO filter yesterday. I've got enough water for us to mash and sparge with. I've got a little bit extra as well, just in case we become a little bit out of what we need to achieve.
Yeah.
But essentially, the notes that Thornbridge gave us wasn't actually totally in the video in terms of what they're actually targeting. So they are targeting 350 parts per million of sulfate.
Okay, that's quite high, yeah.
Yeah. And they're also targeting 150 parts per million of chloride. The other thing that they said, and this was from Ben, he dropped to me an email afterwards and says, so this throws the calcium to the top end of 200 to 250 parts per million, and they also adjust their pH, and they're targeting between 5.3 and 5.5. And they're using lactic acid 80% to do that.
So that gives us a really good overview of what we're looking at for the water, but there are a couple of blanks in there still, like magnesium and sodium. The full details for the water profile can be found with the recipe kit, which is in the description down below, and I'll also stick a link up here as well. Right, okay, well I think we need to crack on, right, because time's pushing on, always like that on a brew day when we're filming. But yeah, I'm really excited. So we'll dive into the mash, we'll get that done. It's fairly straightforward, 100% low colour Marisotto, but then when we get on to kind of the more interesting stuff around hopping, we'll be back and we'll do a little bit of talking through that as well. We're at the end of our mash, aren't we, Martin?
Well, mashed and sparged, James.
Yeah. So actually just touch on a little bit what we've done with the mash, because it is a little bit different to maybe what some of our customers might be used to.
Yeah, I mean, Thornbridge said to us, it's just a 45-minute mash. No mash out, but I added a mash out on there because I can, and I just wanted to be belt and braces, really.
All right, and what temperature did we mash at?
At 65.
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, pretty standard.
Yeah, bang in the middle, be nice and fermentable, because we're aiming for a final gravity of around about 1010, aren't we?
Yes, James, we're aiming for 1010 as our final gravity. While that finishes draining through, I've took the liberty of taking the CO2 extract, putting it in some really warm water, because it's basically like a solid brick in that tub. So we want to warm it up so we can actually then syringe out our 4.7 and get that in there once we get the basket off.
Now, I mean, there's a reasonable amount of grain in this. It's nearly 6 kilos, isn't it? So actually, we've had to take our sparge quite slow and steady, just so that we don't risk disturbing the grain bed too much and causing channeling and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was no rush to get it through. So there was no need to kind of break it up. I just kind of let it take its time.
So we just need to now wait for these to come up to the boil, get rid of the grain basket, crack on with our hop additions.
Yeah. So, boil, James.
Yeah.
The start, had to whisk it up vigorously. You want to get that wort mixed up, because otherwise you're just reading from the bottom. We wanted a vigorous boil. So
yeah, and with that method, we did actually get quite a vigorous boil going on the G40s as well.
Yeah, it takes a few minutes though to get to that point.
Yeah, but we also got quite a lot of evaporation, didn't we? I think we both started with around about 26, 27 litres in our grain fathers, and actually towards the end of the boil, we checked and we were at 22 litres, so actually that's quite a bit of evaporation. We did do a gravity reading and have back liquored, because we were actually at like in the sort of 1060s, weren't we?
Yeah, mine was at 1070.
Yeah.
So thankfully I managed to keep a bit of extra RO in the sparge water heater, just for that occasion.
Yeah, always a good idea, right? And yeah, we've back liquored them right down to 1055 each, so we know we've got the same starting gravity. Yeah. We used our refractometer to double check that. And where are we at now?
So we sanitise the chiller while it's really hot. flushing out the whatever was left in there first before putting it in back into the grain father. We've then chilled it down slightly. I went a little bit too far. You were still a little bit higher, but basically we've aimed for 92, which is what Thornbridge do their whirlpool at. We've got the heat on. We've done 5 minutes with the pump and the whirlpool arm running. You know, you could stir that if you haven't got a whirlpool arm or a whirlpool feature on your kettle. And then we've stopped. So we're going to wait 10 minutes. We're going to come back and we're going to add the leaf hops and the Simcoe pellets.
That first whirlpool edition was only 13 grams of Chinook, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So leaving that now to stand for a good 10 minutes, just to let everything settle and calm down. And like you say, we'll be back in a minute to get all those delicious whole cone hops in. So we've come to the end of the whirlpool, well, our first whirlpool, Martin, which was that small charge of Chinook that's been spinning for 5 minutes and then resting for 10. Where are we at now?
Right, so it's onto the big charge of leaf and the Simcoe pellets. We've got something with this recipe kit that we're going to be selling that we don't do for any other beer. And this is all because Rob was just so adamant leaf hop is so important on this recipe. Right? Normally we only do leaf in 100 gram bags. We don't do smaller, you know, it's an expense, it's time, it's really tricky and it's like really fiddly. It's something we don't do. Within that pack, you've got all of your leaf hops individually bagged at the weight you need for this recipe, for this whirlpool, the final Hopnik edition.
And what have we got? So there's
got Cascade, which replaces the Artanum. You've got Chinook, Centennial, Columbus, and then Simcoe in pellet, because we can't get the leaf of that.
right. Okay. So do you want to get yours in?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, Cascade. That smells absolutely fantastic.
And it's so green as well, that Cascade.
Well, they all vary, you know, and the size of the cone, even though they're dried and a little bit flat, you can still see how each hop differs. So that's the Chinook, that's the Centennial, and there goes the Simcoe pellets. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my paddle and we're going to replicate the plunging that we saw them doing. You know, get all the hops wet, get them in there.
And Martin, are you going to keep the whirlpool on for this, the pump spinning?
Right, so the pump is going to be on. Our temperature is still 92. Pump is going to be on for 10 to 15 minutes. I haven't decided what I'm going to go with. I think I'm going to start with 10 and just see how it smells and looks. And then after that, turn the pump off, just let it settle out for exactly the same amount of time that I do with the pump on.
That was long, right?
Why do we always pick the hottest day to do a brew?
2 brews.
I'm sweating pints here, and I think the grain fathers were too. How much bat liquoring did we have to do?
Yeah, we had to do a fair bit. So we've already mentioned we had to bat liquor into the kettle before the whirlpool. And actually, we've had to bat liquor a little bit more in the fermenters as well.
Yeah.
I also had a block pump on the G40 that I was brewing on. So we had to blow some CO2 through the chiller, back up through the pump just to get it moving again. But once we overcame those things, which it happens, right? It's home brewing. We have
Happens to everyone.
Yeah, we have to overcome these things.
That's part of the treat of brewing, learning how to get past all these little things that it throws up.
You might call it a treat.
Well, today, I mean, there was a lot of, it might have seemed like a very simple brew day for what might look like a simple recipe on a brew sheet, but there were a lot of intricacies because we were doing things out of spec.
Yeah, like whirlpooling at 92 and keeping
the
temperature
temperature
going.
So you're getting evaporation out of there.
Yeah, and also, you know, all-in-one systems are brilliant on most recipes where you can just kind of push go, come back when it tells you to, that kind of stuff. Yeah. This actually, we had to be much more hands-on.
Well, yeah, just to maintain that 92 degrees, you couldn't really walk away because if you set it for 92, it's kind of hitting 91. If you set it for 93, then it could spike and go to 94. So you really had to watch it for that like first part.
And we had the pump on for certain points of the whirlpool, the pump off for certain points. You know, yeah, it was a really hands-on brew day experience. But we're all cleaned up now. We've got wort in the fermenters.
Yep.
All we've got left to do is pitch our yeast and leave it, right?
Well, yeah, fermentation for Thornbridge normally takes about 5 to 6 days. So from when the previous batches I've done, it's taken 6 to 7. You know, it's a homebrew scale, it's slightly different. So, and it's not under pressure.
Yeah, and we're going to need to then add our dry hop addition.
Yes, so the dry hop addition will go in. I'm planning to do that, dump off the yeast when it's finished fermentation, take it down to that 12 and put the dry hop in there. We should try the different packaging methods. I've got an idea for the cask one, bottling some.
Yeah.
And also putting some into an oxy bar with some sugar to naturally carbonated, like you put in the cask.
Yeah, like Rob was talking about, right?
Yeah.
Putting some simple sugars in so that we get a really active re-fermentation in our cask.
Yeah.
And then I think we should tap Rob up for that hand pull that he's got at home.
By the magic of editing, or you sitting at a computer and doing the editing,
Yeah.
it's like 2 weeks since that brew day.
Just over, actually. Yeah.
You know, we were saying on that day it was really hot. It's even hotter today.
I know, it's like 25 degrees outside, so in the warehouse here it's going to be even hotter, which means that I'm getting a thirst on.
Let's just recap a little bit about the brew day, some things that we've kind of processed since, and, you know, talk about the recipe kit that we're going to be offering. So we've made a few tweaks and changes from things we've learned. First of all, CO2 extract. You're not getting that because it's really messy.
It's hard work, right? You ended up with very sticky fingers.
Yeah, you know, and you can't get that stuff off. Anyway, we're going to use Flex. It's a higher concentration, so you're going to use less of it, and it's more flowable. So the measurements will be on the kit of how much you need to do in place of the CO2 extract. And we did talk to Thornbridge about using Flex, and it was just the fact that the scale that they were using, there was just variations and packaging sizes, so they were just used to using what they've always used over 20 years.
But it makes no difference to the beer. It's all about adding IBUs at that point. So Flex is a great option.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it. I've used it a number of times over the years. And like you say, it's just so much easier to handle.
Yeah, and we also talked about in the bit, which was probably only a few seconds ago for you watching at home, back liquoring. It's not criminal. I cannot stress how much. Don't feel bad that you haven't hit your numbers and you have to add some extra water in. We were doing so many different things that were slightly out of spec. You know, if you look at that whirlpool where we're having to kind of maintain that 92 degrees for what was almost an hour, you know, having to get the boil up to a really vigorous boil, that's time getting to that point.
You know, as you brew this recipe time and time again, you'll be able to get closer to what the volumes that you need are, what your efficiencies are for your brewing system. You know, we always base our efficiencies on like an all-in-one brewing system. Yours may differ, but ultimately, if you can overshoot your numbers, that's better because you can back liquor down to where you need to be. And it's something that we do have to do from time to time. I think the key to back liquoring though is, as you pre-planned, was making sure you've got the same source water to be using so that you're not adding chlorinated water into your brew at any point.
Yeah, and you know, what you also stress at me all the way through is keep measuring it. Keep measuring it. We were taking readings all the way through and noting down what we were doing at different points. So we can improve it next time, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So anyway, we have ended up with 2 finished beers, haven't we, Martin? A little bit about fermentation, because I know everybody watching is like keen to see how we've done with getting as close as possible to this recipe in the glass. But in fermentation, we've got some stuff to note on that, haven't we?
Yeah, so the fermentation, the one which was like the keg can version, which uses like WLP001 or lax as we've included with the kit, we've put 2 packs in there. It's a 5.9% beer, so 1 pack would struggle. Having 2 packs also means you're going to get that vigorous fermentation like Thornbridge do. We wanted to try and have it done in 6 days like they do. Turned out it was like 7.
Yeah, but it did kick off immediately. There was no lag, and it did what it needed to do, and we got to the point of being able to soft crash it, dry hop it in time frames that we would be happy with any other batch.
Yeah, and the liquid yeast, you know, that was slightly different. You know, we went with what the packet said, just use 1 pack, it'll be good. Slow start, you know, it really lagged at the start. It took like 48 hours to get going. So that really then set us back, and then towards the end, it didn't fully attenuate out because, you know, I think the yeast was just knackered by that point.
Yeah.
You know, it's just worn out, it's done all the work. So lesson for that is, if you're doing the cask version with liquid yeast, do a starter with your yeast. You want that yeast really lively, ready to chomp away at the sugars in your wort. Get it in a starter the day before, 2 days before, if at all possible. Get it really going.
Yeah. The other thing to note as well, you know, we used the White Labs WLP 037, the Yorkshire Square strain.
Yeah.
Now, there's lots of different variations. That's a vault strain, so it isn't going to always be available. We've included a couple of different options, like the Y yeast West Yorkshire as an optional yeast for you.
That's going to be a great yeast.
Yeah.
It's going to really add to the flavour.
What I would say is you need to look at the attenuation numbers on whatever liquid yeast strain that you pick, or indeed dry, but look at the attenuation numbers, because you might need to adjust your mash temperatures based on that, maybe down or up, dependent on what your yeast strain is capable of attenuating. We actually finished a touch high, didn't we, on that?
Yeah. So let's see how much we can actually taste in the beer when we get it in the glass. The last thing I think we got to talk about, James, is packaging. Earlier in the video I said I'd got this dream of, like, I was going to put the cask version into an oxybar, was going to prime it with sugar and naturally carbonate it. Time got the better of me, because that would have really needed like 7 to 10 days in the oxybar to kind of do that cask, kind of almost the 12 days conditioning that Rob was talking about.
Yeah, but we have carbonated it to a lower level than we would for a keg. We are going to hook it up to a hand pull and see how it comes out. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And as ever, we're always learning. One thing we did do, which isn't ready yet, but we brought back some of the 5-litre mini kegs of Jaipur, didn't we?
Those
and they were brilliant. In the weekend after our trip there, it was really kind of just dragging out our Thornbridge experience. Anyway, I kept my one and I brought it in, we emptied it, and we put some of the fermented beer into that mini cask with some priming sugar, and that is now sat priming, conditioning, and I can't wait to see how that turns out. But you'll probably just have to stay tuned on maybe some of our socials for when we actually tuck into that to see how it tastes.
The other great thing about those little mini kegs, which we learned, they're actually using the cask yeast in there. So, you know, if you were smart, you could buy one of those from Thornbridge, drink it, plan your brew day, harvest the yeast, grow the yeast, you get the Thornbridge yeast strain.
Yeah, yeah, which you love doing, right?
Yeah, I'm going to have a go at that at some point.
Right, Martin, we've talked long enough. I think it's time to get some beer in a glass and see how we're doing, right?
I definitely need to rehydrate, James. Get me some beer.
Here we go then, Martin. This is what actually 2 or 3 months worth of work has been leading up to. Are you going to open that can?
Yeah, I mean, it looks the part from memory.
Well, we'll see, won't we?
I've been drinking it at home, so let's get into the can.
Right, starting off with colour. Ours is
marginally dark.
Marginally darker, yeah, and I think that's probably down to just, you know, the contact with the element, you know, a little bit more colour development from the malt. But it's not far off.
It's also slightly hazier. You know, it is probably time constraints. A bit more conditioning would drop that out.
Yeah.
You know, there's brow salt in there, so that would help.
What are you getting aroma-wise?
Slightly citrusy and piney.
The commercial is kind of more vibrant with things like lemon, sort of citrus notes.
Yeah.
Ours is more resinous. Yeah. And maybe that's the cascade kind of thing going on, but there's not a million miles between them.
What are you going to taste first?
Ooh.
Let's taste the real one first.
Chin chin.
Cheers. Oh, so bitter, smooth.
Yeah, it is. Like malt sweetness, bitterness, and then a little bit of sort of citrusy kind of stuff coming through, but nothing, it's not like slap you around the face. It's old school in that way.
Yeah,
you know?
And it's totally different to the cask version.
Yeah.
Because you can taste all of those things rather than having the yeast there giving you that big yeasty hug.
Yeah. Right, let's go in. Malt sweetness is there, very similar. Bitterness is there, and again some like sort of citrusy hop notes, resiny.
Flavour-wise, they're pretty much on par.
Absolutely.
The only thing I think that there's slightly minuscule amount difference here. This is just slightly crisper, and I'm putting that down to the centrifuge.
Yes, yeah, I think, you know, that's actually a really good point. You know, we know that they get that extended time in tank when they're conditioning the keg, can, bottle version, and it's going through the centrifuge, which will absolutely mean make a difference in terms of the brightness. This just sat for another week in the keg would brighten up massively. So
super happy with that as a representation of what is one of my favourite beers.
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it. And all those versions that you've developed along the way,
the hard work was definitely worth it, because, you know, I've got a 20-litre keg of this. But it's not going to stop me from buying cans and bottles, because I like having those at home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such, I mean, it's such an iconic beer, isn't it? Such a great example of West Coast, but brewed and developed here for 20 years.
The thing that I think I probably enjoyed the most was that kind of understanding that what seems like a very simple beer is actually very, very complicated in terms of lots of detail and precision that they do.
Simplicity is sometimes veiled in lots of complexity, right? Maybe we could look at things like adjusting the boil time. You know, you could cut the boil time down a little bit to sort of reduce some of that colour change. We need to see what the cask one tastes like.
God, yeah, that's still sitting there. And we've got Rob's handful we can run it through.
Right, here we go, Martin. Just finishing off pouring our awesome cask pints of Jaipur. And there we go. Blimey, that looks good.
And it does. There is just something about the theatre of a beer engine, isn't
there? There is, but also, Martin, what I would say is it is super bright as well. Putting it in the ox bar and using that as a sort of bright tank kind come pseudo cask has worked brilliantly.
I've been doing that in a lot of beers now, and yeah, it works so well as a piece of kit to do that with.
Yeah. Right, let's go in for a smell.
Gonna get it on your nose. Frothy boy.
Oh, do you know what? There's a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more yeast ester.
Did say it didn't fully attenuate out.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, mate.
That has got more yeast character, and it really works so well.
And the bitterness really comes through as well. That is glorious.
It is slightly sweet.
Yeah.
You know, like we knew it was going to be because of where it finished off.
What I would say is, though, the IBUs really sing through as well. So that does balance out the little bit of extra sweetness that we've ended up in the beer. I think this finished at, what, 10, 12, something like that?
Yeah, somewhere around about
Yeah,
there.
and we were aiming for 10, 10.
I've got to put that down because otherwise I am just going to smash that, which is not a wise thing at 11 o'clock in the morning.
No, it's not. Of the two versions, that cask version really does remind me more of sitting in the tap room drinking cask Jaipur throughout the days when we were there with Thornbridge filming and learning all about the processes. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit more golden, but it's not so far out of spec that you'd go, it's not the same beer.
You know, it just hammers home everything that Rob told us. You know, liquid yeast adds something to it. You know, they're trying to replicate their house yeast with a Yorkshire strain. The use of leaf hops, like they do, all these little pieces of the jigsaw are kind of what makes it as close to the full picture of Thornbridge Jaipur.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Mate, absolutely awesome success. Well done. You know, you've worked so hard developing the recipe for this. Like we said, this is like version 5, or maybe version 5 and version 6, because we did a double batch on the same day.
I've lost count.
But yeah, you should be really, really thrilled with that.
Well, you know, the great thing about this now, I can brew this and have it on tap at home and keep trying to perfect it. People at home can now have a go at doing it. Don't kind of knock yourself if you don't succeed on the first go. It's not an easy one.
No, it really isn't. And, you know, you might find that you land slightly out of spec with some of your numbers, or, you know, the one thing that actually was a real struggle was getting the bitterness right. But keep going with it. It's such an iconic beer. You said a minute ago off camera, it's taken Thornbridge 20 years to kind of keep that beer as consistent, and it's been around for that long, and it's obviously had some development over time. We've been doing this for a couple of months. If we carry on brewing this, keep tweaking our processes, we are going to be able to get it even closer without the inclusion of any additional ingredients, just refining those processes. Mate, really good work.
Yeah, I'm so happy and proud of that. I think I'm almost ready to send some to Thornbridge for them to have a taste of it, especially with the keg version. I think that's pretty much spot on. The cask, I just need to refine that, and then we will send those up to Thornbridge for them to taste and try.
And if you want to see how Thornbridge find our beers, you're going to need to stay tuned over on our socials for a bit of an update as to when that will happen, and also what kind of format. We might do a reel, we might do a full YouTube video, but we're going to work on that and see what timings can work out. But in the meantime, grab yourself a recipe kit, get brewing it, get enjoying it, try it side by side with some of the original. You know, if you're able to get a mini keg, you know, have a go at brewing the cask version and try it against the mini keg, because, yeah, so much fun to be had.
Such an iconic beer and such a great one to have a go at brewing at home.
Absolutely. And happy birthday to Jaipur.
Yeah,
you know,
20 years
20
old.
years.
Yeah,
right, cheers to that. Now, if you want to have a go at brewing Jaipur yourself, the links to the recipe kits are in the description below. They'll be popping up throughout the video as well, but you can check them out on our website. And if you've got any thoughts, comments or questions, drop them down in the comments section below. We will get back to you. If we don't know the answer, we'll ask Thornbridge on your behalf as well to see if there's something that maybe piqued your interest that you'd like to know more about. And if you want to stay up to date with all of the awesome projects we've got planned here at the Malt Miller, do make sure that you head over to our social channels, so Facebook, Instagram, X, and of course TikTok. Subscribe to us there so you can stay up to date with all the latest news. And if you've made it to the end of the video and you're not already, please do subscribe to our channel, hit the bell for notifications, and of course, give this video a thumbs up. Have a great brew.
You know what's going to happen in those comments? Brett's going to ask for that recipe for that West Coast. You're not going to get it, Brett.
Cheers, Martin.
Cheers.
Right, now to try and do some work.